Welcome to episode 56 of the Relationship Marketing Podcast with Cody B. Today's guest is Anna Liotta. As the youngest girl of 19 children and the proud auntie of 56 nieces and nephews and 38 great-nieces and nephews, she survived and learned to thrive in a sixth-generation household. Anna Liotta is the creator of Generationally Savvy Communication Solutions. She's an award-winning speaker, business consultant, and author. Anna's book, Unlocking Generational Codes, with over 40,000 copies sold, is the key to understanding the people around you, young, old, and in between. Generational expert Anna Liotta takes readers on a journey of how members of each generation think, behave, and engage. She teaches you how to overcome the generation gap so you can effectively communicate and develop meaningful relationships with members of all the generations in the workplace and in everyday life. Anna comes by her passion for understanding the generations organically. Anna is currently serving as the president of the National Speakers Association. She engages audiences with her practical strategies for attracting, growing, and retaining top talent and loyal clients from every generation. And now, Cody B.
Hello, everybody. This is Cody Bateman. Welcome to a brand new episode of our Relationship Marketing Podcast. Super excited for our show today. Before I jump in with our amazing guest, just want to shout out to all of our listeners. Thank you for all of your participation week in and week out, coming on here, sharpening your saw, learning how to generate genuine relationships in your personal life and in your business. This is a crusade. I mean, this really is a crusade, and I think all of us are in this together. It's important that we use this as a format to become a kinder, gentler people, you know, and all of us have occupations. We have businesses we run. It's how we make a living. It's how we survive day to day, and our occupations are our number one way for us to interact with other human beings. And because of that, we need to use our occupation as a means of creating genuine relationship with others, being kind to other people. It's the greatest format for you to reach as many people as possible with your kindness. Now, a lot of you tune in here to learn how to use relationship marketing skills to better your return on investment and to close sales better and focusing on things you can get out of it. But in these shows, we like to focus on what you can give to it. And that's what it's all about. Boy, we have an incredible guest on with us today, Anna Liotta. Anna Liotta, how are you? Did I say that right?
You did. You did great. Thanks. I'm great.
Liotta, wow, this is incredible. We've already heard the accolades of you. Our announcer announced who you were up front, but I just want to kind of jump in. This whole first of all, a great book out right now, Unlocking Generational Codes. Do you have one of those for our YouTube listeners? Do you have one of your books there that you could just put up on the screen?
Of course, it's always sitting right here in the background. Boom.
Yeah, let's take a look at that, because I love the jacket design is awesome. So
thank you.
So those who are not watching on YouTube, I'll try to explain this the best I can. It's super cool. I mean, so it's called Unlocking Generational Codes. So I think we can get the gist that it's about, you know, being able to speak cross-generationally to people and to be effective. And your design is really, really nice. You got some banners that come down representing millennials, Generation Xers, baby boomers like me. I love the title, by the way, Unlocking Generational Codes. What it does is, here's what that title does for me. First of all, it tells me, okay, this is cool because it's a way for me to learn how to interact and create relationship across generations, which is important, and it's a super big topic today. And number two, this whole unlocking codes thing, it must have been written by a really smart person. So I get to do an intelligent read on stuff I love, which is relationships across generations. So tell us a little bit about the book. Just give us a little rundown on why you wrote it and what's covered there.
Excellent. So I love that you really honed in on the codes part of it, because one of the things that drove me to write the book is that when people are communicating, when they're selling, when they're engaging and building relationships with each other. They may or may not know it, but unconsciously there is a code running in the background that's shaping their actions and their reactions. And understanding what are the variables or the aspects that make up that kind of algorithm running underneath that code generationally becomes really important to understand how can we be more effective with each other. Now, what drove me into the generational codes of understanding is that I am the youngest girl of 19 children.
Oh my goodness.
Pause after I say that. Yes, so I have 18 siblings, and I grew up in a household of 6 generations. My dad would have turned 99 years old this year.
Wow.
And so I, from a very early position, was watching these generational dynamics crisscross. And I started to notice that when you understood what the formative experiences were, that 8 to 18 place when our brain is starting to develop an awareness of the world. Who do we trust? Who do we believe? Who do we follow? And how do we engage? It gave you kind of a superpower. And I have a short story of it. My bonus mom, there's a little bit of a romantic story that goes along with that family. But the key thing is, my bonus mom and I were making a lasagna one day for one of our family potlucks. You can imagine, with 19 siblings, they now have 56 kids.
Wow.
And their kids already have 58 kids. So it's a huge family.
Yeah.
And we were making lasagna for one of our family potlucks. And I looked over at her after we were cleaning up, and I was washing down the lasagna plate. And she had the tinfoil that the lasagna had been covered in, and she was wiping it down, smoothing out the wrinkles. She was operating from what I would call a generational code. Because when you look at her formative years from 8 to 18, what we know from knowledge studies is that between the ages of 7 and 8, our brain starts to make logic. And between the ages of 8 to 18, we're now watching the world around us, the leaders, the icons, the events. And when there's an emotion and it's paired with an imprint or an event, it creates even a deeper imprint. So when we're looking at someone and trying to understand what drives their willingness and how they go about getting related to each other, we really need to understand what are those core events between 8 to 18 that shape their worldview, or what I call their generational code. So here's my bonus mom wiping down lasagna, wiping down the tinfoil. And I realized that even though today we have plenty of resources to buy more tinfoil, she's still influenced by the Great Depression and World War II. And that's part of her generational code. Now, what does that mean? It means that when I want to get related to her, when I want her to trust me, when I want her to buy from me, I need to understand what are the generational codes around selling? What are the generational codes around why she would trust me, where she would go to find out about me, that I need to understand so I can toggle into her generational code and be effective.
So on this show, we have a lot of guests that are sales gurus, speakers, whatnot, and they're out training on sales all the time and talking about different sales tactics and how to create relationship in the new sales process. And a thing that comes up a lot is assessment, the word assessment. In fact, I swear I'm going to write a book with the assessment in the title somehow, because it's a common theme that in today's day and age, you need to assess the need of the person that you're talking to. So when I hear you talk about generational codes and understanding codes, I immediately think of that word. I mean, isn't that part of an assessment? You're assessing. So because our listeners are used to assessing need, but what about assessing generational codes? I mean,
Exactly.
there needs to be. Now, it seems to me like I'm intrigued by that, but at the same time, I'm a little intimidated by it, because it's like, good criminy, I got to do all kinds of assessing when I go to talk to somebody. How am I going to ever know what to say to anybody?
Exactly.
I gotta know where they came from and what generation they're in and what excites them and what, So how do you keep track of all that and do it the right way?
Boy, that's a great point, because people do start to feel overwhelmed by all the different tools that they could use. And generational codes is definitely one of those super tools. Here's the thing that happens initially it seems a little chaotic because you're thinking, well, I relate to that too, and I relate to that too. But what you start to see is the generational codes augments the other assessment tools that you use. So whether people are using personality styles or buying styles assessments, when you also understand the generational codes, it starts helping it kind of bring it into a focus, a clarity. Let me give you an example. So I was having a meeting with a Gen Xer. Now, Gen Xers as a code like to cut to the chase, get to the bottom line, just the brass tacks, right? They like to be brief, be brilliant, be gone. And so I sat down with this Gen Xer. They'd reached out to me. They'd read an article I'd published in a business journal, and they wanted to have coffee. So we sat down. Immediately he says, okay, so how do you do this? How do you do that? What do you work with people like this? Da, 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 da. And we were 12 minutes into the conversation before he paused to say, oh, did you want coffee? Now, this was the interesting thing. I said to him, I'm good. We're already doing good stuff. But are you open to an observation? Because he wanted to know more about generations and selling. Mm-hmm. I said, one of the things that you demonstrated the moment you sat down that I jumped right in on was cut to the chase, get to the bottom line. But here's my question for you. Have you had challenges selling to baby boomer clients? And he said, what do you mean? I said, do you ever get called rude or abrupt or cold or clinical? And he said, oh my gosh, it's one of the core things my staff tells me, that people will misinterpret my cut to the chase, save you time in business by being bottom line and think that I'm all of those things. I said, the key thing is when baby boomers are getting related in business, when they're getting into the sale, their opening get related activities are asking about you, asking about your hobbies, asking about your background, asking about your school, asking about your kids, all of these relatedness. And maybe in the last 10 minutes of a 60-minute conversation, they'll get to the business. So as a Gen Xer, if you come in and you're seeking to woo, to engage, to attract someone to buy from you, and you cut to the chase, get to the bottom line, there's been a generational code violation. So even though you're trying to be saving them time, like if you only need 18 minutes to be able to cut to the chase, to you, you're thinking that's respect. To them, they're thinking, whoa, Nellie, we've not got there yet.
Help me out real quick on the whole, just summarize, Generation X is what age group?
So let me give you the birth years of the five generations alive.
Real quick, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So our traditionalists are born 1927 to 1945.
Well, they're old people. Super old or traditionalists. Got
exactly. It. Okay. Your words, not mine. I like to say chronologically advantaged. Right. There is no such thing as old. Right. So our baby boomers are born between 1946 and 1964. And they definitely don't want you calling them old people because one of their generational mantras was never trust anyone over 30. And so in their heart of hearts, baby boomers still feel about 29. And one of the quickest ways to lose the sale with a baby boomer is to use age embedded language. So for instance, when the active lifestyle word came up instead of retirement community, now you move into a active lifestyle community for 55 and older. That was a major shift to change your language to match the generational code. AARP also has all of their stories being about what happens after 50 and how people are not done before 50.
So I'm real sensitive to that one because I was born in 1964. So I'm the youngest baby boomer.
There you go.
So I'm real sensitive to that language, because I consider myself, I'm on the border. I could be the next group, which is what?
The Gen Xers born in 1965.
I could be one or the other,
That's right. We call you a cusper. If you're born 4 years before or 4 years after the boundary, then you basically are born during the shifting social mood when major world events are happening that are changing the way that the world sees things. And you kind of get the generation before you, but frankly, there's a lot about the generation after that makes sense as well. So yeah, you're right there on that cusp.
Yeah. Now, I know all this is spelled out in your book. You've got all the details of each of the generations. And so we go to Gen X.
Gen X 1965 to 77. Then the millennials, who were called Gen Y as a placeholder name, are 78 to 99. And then the Gen Zs, who I have coined the name the globals for them, are born 2000 to 2016.
Okay, great. So yeah, and you can see, especially in today's day and age with social media and everything else, where everybody is in everybody's life, you see every single day. You just scroll your feed. You see every day the difference in these generations, just the way people talk, the way they do, the way they post, the way they do videos or not do videos. You see it. I mean, it stares at you. Now, one of the things I like the fact that you spoke to a Gen Xer about how they might speak to an older generation. What I'm finding, and I've had a couple of guests on here that have specialized in quote unquote millennials and how do you work with millennials. It seems like there's this big discussion about that generation, the millennials. And one of the things, and I talk about it all the time, and I'm just being completely transparent, and I may be showing my own weakness or lack of proper perception or whatever. I'm not afraid to do that. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm on this show to learn like everybody else, but I'm completely transparent. I have had in the past. I've been helped by some of our guests. I've had a real pet peeve with, and you have to be careful now because you don't want to pick on a generation because then they get mad at you, kind of stuff. But I've had a pet peeve, particularly with millennials. I employ a lot of millennials, technology people. And I've had a pet peeve because it just seems like, in my mind, my perception, it seems like it's kind of a one-way thing. A millennial is saying, no, you learn how to talk to me. I don't need to learn how to talk to you. You learn how to talk to me. Otherwise, I'm not going to help you, kind of thing. And there seems, in my world at least, there seems to be a little bit of that enabling mentality where I think your book is saying, no, we all have a responsibility to learn how to talk to each other. So millennials and Gen Zers, you got to step up too. It's not just about the old people learning how to talk to you. It's about you learning how to talk to the old people. And I'm completely transparent because half the audience loves me for saying it. The other half's ticked off at me right now, but it's just real. I mean, that's how baby boomers feel. Everyone I talk to feels the same way. They're afraid to say it because it's not politically correct to say. So what do you have to say about all that? How important is that?
Well,
am I just crazy?
It's incredibly important. If you want to be a relational influencer, then you darn well better be willing to learn about the other person's code. If you want to understand how to engage, attract, woo somebody, then you have to be able to toggle into their code. You have to be able to get into the space of what matters to them. So when the NBA hired me, they initially hired me to help their player strategists work with the players, the coaches, and the GMs. How did they get into that code of the millennial players and now even the Gen Z players? Then they turned around and hired me to help them with the G Leagues, to understand help the players understand how do we shift to be able to be better at getting brought up to the NBA. That means we have to understand Gen X are coaches and Gen X are GMs and boomer coaches and boomer GMs. So it's always about, are you in the position of attracting or being attracted? If somebody's trying to sell to you, then they better get into your code. If you're trying to sell to them or influence them, you better be able to get into their code. So whatever generation I'm working with, and that's why, I really do a full generational spectrum approach, which is not that one is better or more important than the other, but what has people feel the pressure is that our entire young adult workforce, 21 to 42 right now, is all millennials. Mm-hmm. That's why so many organizations are feeling the power and feeling the push to understand them better and to shift their marketing and the way that they approach things, because their buying power is only going to increase. While our baby boomers still hold a predominance of the wealth, there is a large wealth transfer happening, and more than ever, our baby boomers are influenced by their millennial children in their buying decisions. We've never seen this kind of generational dynamic where an elder generation is as influenced in its core markets, whether it's technology, whether it's travel, whether it's, experiential. Millennials influence their parents. And now baby boomers are influenced by their grandbabies. They're not grandchildren because that sounds old, grandbabies. And so that's where understanding the younger generations drives becomes even more important, even when you're selling to a more chronologically advantaged generation.
How do we instill in our young folks coming into the workforce now, the younger millennials and maybe Gen Zers coming into the workforce now to learn? Because in my mind, I mean, I belong to a generation that understands, at least I think we do, understands that we have to learn how to speak to different generations. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that every generation is gaining that knowledge. Part of what your work is to get all generations to understand that. But it seems to me, my experience has been the younger the generation is, the more that education needs to take place. And here's the example I like to give. And again, some young people get offended when I do this, but it's like, it's just real to me. It's just real. And so I just say what's real. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just saying what's real. When I was coming into the workforce, there was no discussion about me being the cool new guy and entitlement and this and that, and you better learn how to talk. There was none of that. I mean, when I came into the workforce, you darn well better have a huge amount of respect for the person that hired you, for the boss, for whatever, your mentors, your coaches along the way, your professors, all these people, they come from a place of respect, and my job is to be able to come in and relate with them. They invited me into their sandbox, not the other way around. They invited me into their world. So I need to learn. I'm responsible coming in. I'm responsible to learn how to speak to them. I feel that we've lost some of that. I feel that some of these kids coming in today, they don't have that sense at all. It's like, no, you better learn how to talk to me or I'm just going to go do something else. So first of all, am I right or wrong about that? And I know you want to be correct too and not tick anybody off, but I'm just being real. That's what I experienced. I just see a difference between when I came into the workforce versus how people come into the workforce today.
Well, Cody, let me ask you a tough question. How many years ago did you enter the workforce?
Well, gee, that's a good question. I guess I'd been 23, so almost 30 years ago.
Okay.
Well, 30 years ago.
The moment you say 30 years ago, how many other things are the same as they were 30 years ago?
Yeah, they're not.
They're not. And this is where people lose a huge amount of power, is they say, when and then they give an experience without really mapping it to the times and all the other contexts that were happening around it. And we are in a shift right now. We have a very low unemployment rate, and we have a very empowered young adult workforce in a way that we are responsible for, because parents wanted their kids to have a strong sense of self. They put a lot of energy into developing their millennial children's self-worth. Mm-hmm. And they said, stand up for what you want. If you don't ask for it, it's not yours. You get what you ask for. You go in there and you demand, that. And all of these things that we developed in our children are now happening because someone else's child understands their worth, understands their value. And that's the key thing is, while we may have developed in our own children we didn't expect someone else's child to walk into our office and have that same conversation. So now our entire young adult workforce was a generation raised on believing in themselves and speaking up for what they believe. Now, you said something at the top of that comment, which is, this is just the truth. This is just real. And the key thing is, it's real for you.
That's right.
They'll say the same thing. Right. They'll say, this is real for me.
Okay, but I want to add to what you're saying, though. I mean, I raised 3 of those kids. I have 3 kids that are, I guess they would all probably be millennials. They were all born, let's see, they were born between 87 to 93.
They're all in the heart of millennials. That's right.
So I have 3 kids are in the heart of millennials. And my wife and I, we did teach them all those things. We did. Yeah. I mean, we taught them all that stuff.
And they call you for coaching, right? When they're thinking about changing jobs or thinking about asking for a raise or they call you to be coached, right?
They do, but I'm going to tell you, maybe I'm more on the traditional side of things. And I think this is real important because through all of that, we did teach them all that. And I totally get what you're saying. And we're the ones that instilled that in them. I get that. And I instilled a lot of that in my kids. However, I never believed in the everybody should get a trophy. I was adamantly against that, taught that to my kids all the way through. I always taught my kids to respect their elders. I always taught them that, that you are going into somebody else's world. You need to gain respect before you demand it. I taught those principles to my kids too. Mm-hmm. And I think those principles are very, very important regardless of generation. So I do push back on that. I do.
Oh, no. Hey, you can push back on you individually.
This is good conversation because again, I'm struggling with this because there are principles that I think are very important for every generation. And I feel like a lot of times this conversation gives a millennial or a Gen Zer an excuse sometimes to say, see, you just need to listen to me and I don't need to worry about these other principles. And so I just...
So here's the piece, Cody. You had to say, I don't believe in everybody gets a trophy because it was common enough as a phenomenon that it was something you had to speak up about, right? And what I'm talking about with codes and trends is there's enough happening in society that it was the water they swam in, the air they breathed. Right. And so while you individually may have made really strong choices, and I bet your kids are benefiting from that strict or rigor or discipline right now, they're actually probably being a tremendous asset to their organization and getting promoted faster because of that. Mm-hmm. What I'm talking about in a code is what was the overwhelming sense that people grew up in the midst of about what's a right versus what's a privilege. And that's a really important thing because every different generation has a different spectrum on their rights versus privileges coding. And so what you may have thought was a privilege, right? The privilege of speaking up in a meeting, a millennial was raised to believe is their right.
Right. Understood. And I think that those are important. It's important to learn that. It's very important to learn that because again, we're in the relationship business and it's important that we understand that these are dynamics to creating genuine relationship today. We have to respect the generational gaps that exist. We have to respect where people are coming from. But I think the key is it's what we try to create on this show is mutual respect. Yeah. That's what we try to create. So it doesn't matter what age you are. When you come into the game of life, whether that's with your business, with your philanthropy, with your church service, with your sports, whatever it is you're doing, when you come into the game of life, you come in with the mindset of what can I give to this, not what can I get from it. And that's why, to me, that's a sacred principle. Like that's one of those. It's like a universal law. It's like the law of gravity. It's going to be there whether you believe it or not. What you send out is what comes back. So we believe very strongly, no matter who you are, when you come into the game, you need to be focused on what you can give because what you give comes back to you. What you appreciate appreciates. So if you're in with the idea that I'm in this to see what I can get out of it, then whoever you're trying to get from is going to try to get from you. It's universal law. And that's why I think it's important to have that conversation, even when it's not politically correct with the generation, because I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm. So I completely resonate with your perspective there. Here's the thing generationally that people would say. Every single generation would say they agree with you about that.
Yeah.
And their expression, how they deliver that to each other is where things differ. It's like work ethic. Every generation believes they have a strong work ethic. Absolutely. But what the expression of that work ethic looks like is very different. Does it look like I stay till the job is done? Baby boomer. Does it look like work smarter, not harder? Gen Xer. Or does it look like work-life balance? Work is only one aspect of my life. Millennial. How does it look to each generation to get a really strong work ethic? Do I need to be measured on time? or do I need to be measured on output? A millennial would say, why would you measure me on time if I can do something in a third of the amount of time that someone else does, but I deliver on time as promised? Why are you measuring me on time and penalizing me that they're slower than I am?
So does every generation believe they should be measured on results?
That's a great question. Every generation may believe they should be measured on results, but do we have the systems in place to accurately measure results? That's what business owners have to look at is, do I really have an accurate way of saying, here's what I want, here's how I can track how you're doing on it, results not time, and then keep that consistent and fair across all of the people in my organization. That's where organizations are having to go. It's interesting, I live out in Seattle, and Amazon right now needs to hire hundreds of thousands of people to work in their distribution centers across the country. And so right now they are doing a program where anybody can work in their distribution center for only a couple hours a month. And they say, great, we'll do, short segments of time. You get a fair wage, and you only need to give us 24 hours notice if you're changing it. Because wow. They have shifted to saying, okay, we're going to give you exactly this discrete amount. Anybody can work here. And they've got attorneys working there, engineers working there, all these different people who are willing to just add a little segment on because I'm getting exact time for money, and it's a very discrete thing. So they've decided that instead of saying we have to hire you for big, long pieces, we're hiring you for smaller segments exactly and only as needed. Now, on the other end of it, there are organizations that are looking at, okay, all we need is this product done. We don't care how much time it takes you to do it. Here's the set fee we're going to pay you for it. Yeah, think about Upworks and Fiverr and all of that, right? Like this whole talent market is coming in where the gig economy is sometimes you're full-time and sometimes you're sideline.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it takes systems to do that. So those big
That's right. So do you have the systems in place that you can afford to hire specifically and only for the thing that you need? Or do you try to hire one person to do all of it, which is one of the things that goes against the millennial code is I don't want to do things I'm bored by. Now you as a cusping baby boomer would say, hey, being bored by your job is sometimes just part of it. Like it has to get done, right? But we now see this gig perspective, which is, I want to be stimulated. I want to be engaged. I want to love my job. And if not, I've got options. This is not my final destination. And this is a major code difference between the generations. Our baby boomers got on with the company and they were loyal to the company because moving meant getting behind. There was 80 million competitors, right? So with both men and women entering the workforce, and 100 people, 200 people wanted your job, so you stayed.
Yeah.
Gen Xers come in and the recession of the 80s had hit, and their mom and dad who had bled company colors all of a sudden came home one night with a little slip of paper that was pink and they'd been let go of. Yeah. So that two-way loyalty was broken, and Gen Xers don't think of themselves like employees as their boomer parents did. They think of themselves as free agents. They sign a contract, they work a contract, they probably stay 7 to 13 years on average, but they always keep their resume fresh. Millennials, there was no two-way loyalty when they entered the workplace. For them, they're talent, not just free agents, not employees. They're talent. They're working a gig, they're having an experience. And their average tenure is 18 months to maybe 3 years.
Yep.
So how are we ready as an organization to optimize their first 6 months so that we can extend them to 3 years, maybe even 5 if we're lucky? But planning on them for 15 is not a reality.
Very interesting. Boy, I'm anxious to, I've not had a chance to study your book yet. I'm very anxious to study it after this interview. It's amazing. So we are listening to Anna Liotta. She is the author of Unlocking Generational Codes. Highly recommend it. I'm assuming everybody can get that on Amazon.
Absolutely.
So just go to Amazon and look for Unlocking Generational Codes. You are also the founder of the Generational Institute, which is an online training center. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what I noticed over the years of keynoting is that clients oftentimes would say, this was so great, but there are a lot of people that weren't here. And so I created the Generational Institute with its 4 pillars of unlocking generational codes, leading across the generations, selling across the generations, and customer service, to really look at from every perspective, from the traditionalist, boomer, Xer, millennials perspective, how does each generation see leading, see selling, and see customer service? Because as we said at the top of this conversation, it's not about one generation being right and the other being wrong. The Generational Institute puts them in context and contrast to each other, so you can really understand at every level of your team how to serve each generation.
So how would somebody take advantage of that, of the online training courses?
So at thegenerationalinstitute.com, they can get a small business license. Up to 50 folks is the smallest license, and then we can do enterprise licenses above that.
Oh, okay. So I, as a company, could buy a license for 50 seats.
That's right.
And take my people through it. So, okay, that's great. So it's called generationalinstitute.com.
Yeah. The other thing too is a number of the licensees buy it for their customers. They actually buy a license and then they give it to their customers that need it. Sometimes associations buy it and they buy it for their members, because a lot of folks know that their people need this information, and it becomes a competitive advantage to have access to the Institute for the people that you serve that need it, even though that may not be your specialty, but you know that your customers need it.
Wow, that's great stuff. So you do a lot of speaking. You go out, you keynote a lot of events and go out and speak on this subject. In fact, you are currently serving as the president of the National Speakers Association. That's a big deal.
Yes, it is. It's a
Wow.
wonderful organization with extraordinary speakers all across industries. And it's really a privilege and a good portion of work to lead.
So we mentioned in the pre-show, you serve on it's kind of a 4-year tenure, or that you serve on a board. How does that work?
Oh, so and as you join the National Speakers Association, you can get elected to the board of directors. After a couple of years, you raise your hand in service and you run for the presidency. That means you start your presidency 4-year cycle as the vice president, then you become the president-elect, then you serve as president, and then you have another year as the past president. So it's a deep commitment when you raise your hand in service.
So right now you're on the 1 year of the president spot.
That's right. That's
Wow.
right.
Well, thank you for your service in that capacity. I know the National Speakers Association is a great service to the community, and it brings a lot of great talent out in the marketplace for people to learn from. So it's a wonderful organization. So Anna, there's so much we could talk about here. It's just such an honor to have you on the show. How would somebody go about booking you for a speech?
Oh, so my speaker website is annaliotta.com, ANNALIOTTA.com. And you can go on, and my phone number is right at the top right-hand corner, or feel free to fill out the contact page and we'll get back to you in just a few hours.
Excellent. That's great stuff. So here's what I like to do. I always like to close these shows by giving you the floor. I've asked you questions. You've kind of been in the box where you've had to respond to things that you had to respond to some of my pushbacks and shenanigans today. And you've been phenomenal. It's been great. I wish we had a couple hours with you, because there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about. But I think instead of trying to direct you anymore, just give you the floor, let you close out the show any way you want. So our listeners who are here to learn about relationships, building genuine relationship marketing, what golden nuggets of wisdom do we want to close out with? Floor's yours. Go ahead.
Excellent. I think the key thing that people have to understand is that each generation has a demand for meaning. And when you are selling, when you are leading, when you are engaging them, when you understand what their currency of meaning is, you have an entirely new access to creating a deep relationship that's not just transactional to the first product or the first sale that you do, but it leads you into a deeper long-term relationship that's based on understanding their currency, whether it's significance, whether it's happiness, whether it's contribution or compassion, each generation's currency derives their actions and reactions. So beginning to understand their demand for meaning and how your product or service meets that is all available to you in a dialogue that is generationally code supported. So when you do that, it gives you a competitive advantage to understand sometimes it's not just personal, it's generational.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your words of wisdom there. So do you accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment for your speaking?
It's something I'm looking at for 2020. I did not do it in 2019.
That defines what generation you're from, right?
That's right.
Maybe.
And this is key. It defines the buyer generation. So right now, as the increasing number of speakers and meeting planners shift to millennial, there will be more of a demand for using cryptocurrency. But right now, there's still a lot of baby boomer and Gen Xer buyers in the meeting planning space. So I haven't had a lot of requests for that, but it does come down to not just me, but who's buying me and do they need that?
Right. Excellent. Well, there you have it, everybody. Anna Liotta, the author of Unlocking Generational Codes, also the founder of the Generational Institute. Please check her out. Make sure you get a copy of her book. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today. You've provided great content for us, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cody.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you all on another episode. We'll keep them coming. We got them lined up. We got some amazing people like Anna lined up, and we'll keep this great stuff coming your way. So take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Enjoyed this episode of the Relationship Marketing Podcast with Cody B, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a review so that together we can get this message, The Power of Human Connection, out to the world. You can find Cody's new book, The Power of Human Connection, on Amazon or the Send Out Cards gift store.